Hello everyone, Caren Glasser here, and welcome to this episode of The Passion Point. This is the show where we follow passionistas all around the world who are following their passion, making a living doing what they love. And today I'm excited because we have a really cool woman on with us. Her name is Judith Ingalsbe, and she is a wife, a mother, an author, a businesswoman. And she's also has a new book out, which we're going to be talking about. I'm just so excited about this. She has endured more heartache in over a decade than most will ever experience. Judith's grandmother, mother, and veteran father were all diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, a progressive degenerative disorder which attacks the brain's nerve cells, resulting in loss of memory, thinking, and language skills, as well as behavioral changes. I know I've been touched by family members with Alzheimer's, and I am sure a lot of our viewers have been touched by this as well. She has made beauty from ashes as her prayers to encourage others in a more powerful way were answered. And so, Judy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Caren.
So we're going to start the show like I always do, and that is to define the word passion. And according to Webster's dictionary says that passion is an intense, driving, or overmastering feeling or conviction. What do you say, Judy? What does passion mean to you?
Well, I believe that when we find our calling, when we find our specific talents and abilities and use those to help others, that's when I believe we really are powerful and our passion really shines through.
So I've already mentioned just very briefly that your focus these days, and has been for quite a while, is Alzheimer's, and you have a new book out. So let's before we get to the book, let's talk about your journey. Let's talk about where you came from and how you got basically to where you are today. This is your life.
Right. When I was a little girl, my grandma was diagnosed with a fairly new diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. Up until that point, we referred to people as senile. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was just what happened. When people got old, they forgot. And Grandma was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and lived with Alzheimer's disease for over a decade. So I witnessed my mom caring for her as her primary caregiver. And my brother was tragically murdered when I was a young adult. And Mom sunk into a deep depression. So I think when she developed Alzheimer's disease, we all sort of wrote off her symptoms as depression and stress and heartache, of course. So when she was finally diagnosed, we were in crisis mode. I had to move my parents. Now as an only child, I was responsible for them, getting them out of their home at the doctor's insistence. And once again, I wrote off the symptoms I was seeing in my dad, as he had cared for her for so long and really hidden some of her symptoms. So I moved to my parents and shortly thereafter received a diagnosis for my father. So literally overnight, I lost both of the parents I knew, the support system I had, the loving advice, and the shoulder to lean on. So it really was a tragic, terrifying experience. And
I can't even imagine. I mean, I'm listening to retell this story, and I can only imagine what our viewers are thinking right now. How did you deal with this? How did you handle this? This is huge. It
is, and you're much stronger than you realize. When we get into situations that we literally have no idea what we're going to do the next moment. I leaned on God, lots of prayer, and literally walking moment by moment, finding a support system, and making decisions, making mistakes, having a lot of grace with myself, and realizing I'm not perfect, and I'm going to make mistakes, and somehow we're going to get through this.
So, there's a lot of terms that we hear when people talk about this disease. We hear Alzheimer's, we hear dementia, we hear early onset. What are all these terms? How do they connect? Do they connect? And what do they mean to all of us?
I think there is a lot of misunderstanding about what exactly Alzheimer's is. And what dementia is. I hear often people say, oh, I don't think my loved one has Alzheimer's. They have a mild case of dementia. Dementia is not a disease. Dementia is an umbrella term which comprises all of these diseases. There's literally hundreds of diseases of dementia, Alzheimer's being the most common. There's a vascular dementia, usually caused by strokes, a lack of oxygen to the brain. Parkinson's, most people don't realize, is a form of dementia. It is a deterioration of the brain, and our brains affect literally everything. They run our bodies. So when the brain is affected, it affects everything. These diseases are usually terminal. Alzheimer's disease is terminal, which I think is a big misunderstanding.
Yeah.
When my mother died, people would say, well, I knew your mom had Alzheimer's disease, but I didn't know she was sick.
Right.
And on her death certificate, the cause of death is Alzheimer's disease. There's also dementias that are reversible. So that's why it's so important to get a diagnosis. Sometimes UTIs, medications,
wow,
all sorts of things can cause dementias that are reversible. And I also see people think, well, my loved one's forgetful. This is just Alzheimer's, and you're just stuck.
Well, okay, so when somebody says that they are early onset, what does that, is that pre-Alzheimer's? Is that there's a family history? What does that mean?
That's what most people think. They think early onset are the beginnings of the disease. Actually, early onset is specifically people under the age of 65 who are diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And I personally know several people in their 50s and 60s. The youngest case was in their late 20s. It's not just an old people's disease like so many think. And it's so tragic when it strikes folks who are still working, who aren't ready, to retire. It's a financial impact, especially at that age. And then also the liability of, they've been practicing as lawyers, as in pharmacists, as
doctors. And what does that mean about what they've done or decisions that have been made? Wow.
Exactly. And the tragic thing about this disease is when they're inflicted, they don't realize. They don't know. They can't tell that their reasoning skills are being diminished.
So why is it so important to advocate for this disease, this condition? I mean, I can make some guesses, but why do you say it is so important to advocate for this?
Well, they say by the year 2050, if we do not find a cure or treatment for this disease, we're going to totally financially wipe out our country. Medicare cannot support this disease. It's long-term, usually lasting over a decade, as I've seen with all of my family members. And quite quickly, they need a lot of support and care. So the financial impact is tremendous. We haven't even started touching the baby boomers. And once this disease, it's just going to explode. So it's the only disease in the top 10 killers that has no treatment, it has no cure, and it's terminal.
Now, you sent me a statistic, a number that I'm reading it right now, and it's staggering. How many millions of victims are that have Alzheimer's? 44 million
in the world.
It's a
worldwide epidemic.
Wow. And are there treatments on the horizon? Are there cures on the horizon? What is being done in the medical industry right now to work towards a cure?
There's hope on the horizon. I will say there's hope. We're terribly underfunded. There's many researchers, dedicated researchers, who have wonderful plans that aren't they're financed. So that's one reason we're advocating in Washington, D.C., asking for additional funding and support to find treatments, to find cures. It's a long time once, of course, once they start the process. We're not advocating for our loved ones. We're advocating for people we will never meet. We're advocating for the future, because we've lived this disease, and we want a better future for our children, for our grandchildren.
I'm reminded of an expression there, for the grace of God, go us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is a great segue and a great lead into what you have done. You have written a book, and it's called Stone Benches. Tell us a little bit about the book, and what has happened since you have written this book for you. It's pretty exciting.
Thank you. Well, over the years, I've spoken to different groups and shared my story. And last October, I was sharing my story at a support group, and I looked out over the audience, and everyone was crying. And I thought to myself, well, is what I'm saying so sad? And then I realized, I wondered when I had stopped crying about it. I wondered when I had stopped feeling. We're so overburdened as caregivers and down in the trenches.
Right.
And I really felt like we've been hiding in corners. It's historically been a shameful disease. People tend to blame the victims. If only they had done enough crossword puzzles or eaten enough kale, then this wouldn't have happened to them. And people also think, they look at me and they feel sorrow for me because they think this is inevitable for me. It's inevitable for a lot of people, not necessarily a genetic disease. It can happen to anyone. And I just saw so much misunderstanding, so much misinformation. And I determined that day I had to do more than just make it through another day. That this wasn't about me. It wasn't even about my family. It was about all of these people who are going to be diagnosed next week who have never even heard of the disease or don't understand. I wanted to offer hope. And I knew that at the very least, my mistakes could serve as instruction for others, and that I had experiences to offer.
So tell us about the book. Is the book a textbook? Is it a story? Is it it's a book of hope? Tell us a little bit about the book.
It is a story of my family. I do share our experiences, my parents' diagnosis, how I handled certain situations. Mm-hmm. It is also just stock full of information, advice, and resources. Lots of resources that if someone is diagnosed with this disease, they can pick up the book and they automatically have a place to turn. They can pick up their foot and make the next step.
Now, I know you mentioned Washington, D.C., and you had something really exciting happen just, I guess, about a month ago, right? Yes. Tell us about what happened. You went to Washington, D.C. How did you get there? And what did you do when you were there? It's really exciting.
Never in my wildest dreams would I have thought, I want to go to Washington, D.C. But as in the process of writing the book, my husband kept saying, if you can help just one person, if just one family is affected by this book, then it's worth all of the effort. And during the process of writing, there's a story in my book about a portrait of a little girl who was me, and in a golden frame. And when I moved my parents out of their home, my mom took that portrait off the wall. That was her way of expressing herself. Mm-hmm. Everything an Alzheimer's patient does is a form of expression.
Right.
So I just thought, these people inflicted with Alzheimer's disease are precious works of art. They are treasures. And for so long, they've been a statistic. And in Washington, D.C., when we talk about the HOPE Act that is bringing help for caregivers, training for aides, when we talk about funding, we say there's 5.3 million people in the United States with this disease. It's a number. And I wanted to take a face. That's when I came up with the They Have a Name campaign, and take their pictures in frames to Washington, D.C. and say, this is our story. And I'm just one story. All of us have a story, and all of us can impact the future by telling our stories and helping people understand what this disease is really like. So I mentioned it to my publisher, Jody Harris, and I said, I am supposed to go to Washington, D.C., and I need pictures of my loved ones. And I started inviting others. There were 3 women whose fathers are veterans, as my father is. They're all on hospice. We went to advocate for people we'll never meet, telling our father's stories. So Jody Harris was wonderful. She said, we're going to make this happen. We went to the Alzheimer's Advocacy Forum. We spoke to our senators, had meetings set up with them, were able to tell our stories. Actually, one of the women who went with us, her father is a buddy of my dad's in memory care, and he's also a hunting friend of one of our senators. And this particular senator didn't have any family with the disease, didn't really know anyone with the disease. And when he saw his friend's picture and realized that this disease was taking his life, it really impacted him.
I can't even imagine, but I can only imagine. That's powerful. That is absolutely powerful. And for those who are watching right now, I want to remind you to look right down below there. You can find where to get the book, and they have a name campaign and all the different things that Judy is involved with. I know that you're watching, and sometimes I take notes when I watch things, but not everybody does. So, take a look down there. I want to ask you a question. So if I were to say, what is your passion? What would you say?
Helping others, inspiring others that they can get through any type of adversity, that there is hope, and that despite anything they're going through, it can be turned for positive for someone else. It can help someone else.
And we live in a society these days, a lot of people who have been laid off from work, downsized, they find themselves out of work. They call themselves, entrepreneurs, because it makes them feel a little bit better than saying I'm unemployed. And they, for the most part, have lost their passion. What do you tell somebody who, finds himself in this situation and just can't even figure out what their passion is? Is there something that you would say to them or guide them to maybe discover that passion once again so that they can rediscover life? What would you say to them?
Well, first of all, we can't afford to lose our passion. Right. We're here on earth for a purpose. We all have gifts and talents and abilities. And that is one reason I wrote the book. I've always loved to write. I've always had a passion for it. And written encouraging notes to my family and friends, written speeches, written little pieces. And I started praying about how I could use my talent in a larger way to affect more people. And I believe that's how people find their passion. They tap into their talents. It's not hard to find. We all have them. Right. And I think a lot of times it's a lack of confidence in ourselves, and we have to realize those talents aren't about us. They're to be used to help and encourage others.
I'm listening to you, and I'm just so honored that you are here with us today and sharing your story. It is such a powerful story, and it is such a powerful message to basically almost everyone at this point, because as you said, there's 44 million right now. It's only going to get larger, and hopefully a cure, and hopefully a response to this terrible, terrible disease is going to be coming in a much sooner time than later. I love quotes, Judy. I love what happens every morning when I open up social media or I open up the many motivational books that I have, and I find something that just gets me going in the morning. And ironically, the one that got me going today is actually one of mine, and it never really happens that way because I've only made one quote. So the fact that this just popped up is great. And it's about passion. And it says, passion drives us, motivates us, and enables us to live the life of our dreams. That to me is, as you said, you should not lose your passion. That's a terrible thing to happen to anyone. Is there a quote or a saying or something that gets you going that you'd like to share with our audience?
Oh, wow. I love quotes too. I love scripture. That's what motivates me most, I think. I quoted a scripture at the beginning of my book that to him who is able to do immensely more than we could ever dream or imagine. And I think that's just so inspiring, that the biggest thing we could possibly think of, the most wonderful thing we could imagine that we could do, he is able to do so much more through us if we just trust and obey. I would have never dreamed of just even what's happened so far. I was praying for one person to be helped, one person to be affected from this book. And early on, my publisher found me. I hadn't even completed the book. And she found me and she said, tell me your story. I have just a few minutes. I'm driving to the hospital. My mother has been hospitalized with an infection. And the doctors are beginning to speak the word dementia.
Wow.
And so I told her my story, and she said, I want to read your book. When you finish it, contact me. I want to read your book. She called me back on Monday, said her mother was being moved, and she needed answers.
Wow.
So even before the book was completed, my prayer was answered that I had helped her, and she signed me, and I finished the book.
That's an amazing story. And I know Jody and how passionate she is in terms of how she shows up in the world and how she wants to help people as well succeed in what they're doing. So it's a wonderful matchup with the two of you, as well as the other people that she works with. If you could spread passion dust anywhere in the world, on anyone in the world, who would you spread it on? And what would you hope to accomplish? And I already kind of know what you're going to say, but
you do?
Well, I don't know. Why don't you tell
I don't. Oh, goodness. Spread passion on anyone at all.
Who would you hope to help?
Oh, well, definitely the folks with this disease.
Right.
I think they're very misunderstood. And, we can't give up on them. I think so often we look at people inflicted with this disease. They're hard to communicate with. They're hard to understand. A lot of times their form of communication is anger because they don't know how else to communicate what they're feeling.
Right.
And I think it's so important to tap in to where they are, to join them in their world. And it's a beautiful place. It really is. When we lay down all of our questions, do you know who I am? And what did you have for breakfast?
Right.
And lay down really the sorrow of what's happened and realize they can't live in the past. They don't have those memories. They've been stolen. They can't live in the future. They're confused about their next step. But they do still have the present. They have this moment. And when we can join them in that moment, it really is a great lesson for us. And
that's beautiful.
That's why I am passionate about them. My favorite place in the whole wide world to eat lunch is with my dad and his buddy Rex.
They are that's awesome.
So fun.
Well, this is such a powerful message. I keep saying this, but I am just enthralled by your journey and the good that you are doing every single day. And if you want to follow Judy's blog, you can go to stonebenchesjourney.com and follow your blog, which would be awesome. Any last thoughts, anything that you would like to share with our viewers before we end the discussion that we're having right now?
Well, I think the one thing we haven't touched on is humor. This is a deep subject. It's a tough subject. It's not pleasant to think about, but there is also a lot of humor. And that is sprinkled throughout my book. It's sprinkled in my blog. And that's what I want people to see is there is still joy. There's joy in every single day, despite anything we might be facing. We can find that joy and we can share it with others.
That's a great message. Judy, thank you so much for being with us. And I hope our viewers take this message to heart. If you are experiencing this in your life right now, if a family member is, pick up the book, get some insight from Judy, and go read the blog and also reach out to her. There's information on how you can reach out to Judy as well. And I want to thank you, our viewers, because we know that you have a choice as to how you spend your time. And I want to thank you for spending time with us today on The Passion Point. And we'll see you next time on the next episode on The Passion Point. See you then. Bye-bye, everyone.